Hello, my name is Tyler Harris, and this is my story of navigating the wilderness of addiction. I grew up here in Birmingham in a wonderful Christian home, parents who loved me, and had a very normal childhood. It really wasn't until I went off to college at Auburn that things took a turn for the worse. At the end of my freshman year was when I began to experiment with marijuana, and it evolved to a point that I couldn't stop. I had to smoke or to be high all the time, and that evolved into my sophomore year being alcohol, bringing alcohol on the scene. So as my drinking and using picked up, I began to experience more consequences. One night, the spring of my sophomore year, I had drank to the point that I had to be hospitalized, and that was a huge wake-up call for my parents that I could not handle this on my own, that I needed some help. When I came home and lived with my parents, I became extremely depressed, and my depression fueled my drinking. That was my excuse, I think. And there was one day driving home from work that I wrapped my car around a tree and got a DUI. It was after this incident that my parents took me to a treatment facility. So it was during this time that after the first treatment center that I was living and working in Auburn, trying to get back on my feet so that I could go back to school, that I fell back into drinking and using, and it was getting worse and worse, kind of like a domino effect. I didn't really care if I lived or died, almost. I was just so depressed and didn't see much value in my life. Periodically relapsed, treatment center, get out, have a few months of sobriety, relapse, treatment center again, and sort of follow this pattern of rehab and relapse. While I was at the last treatment center, John drove out there to meet with me, and it was the first time meeting John, and he wanted to extend a safety net to me for when I got out, called Unbound Grace. And it was during that conversation that we were having where I had a paradigm shift. I came to realize that I had always been seeing sobriety as the end and God as a means to that end. He's just another tool in my tool belt that I'm going to pull out and use when I need to attain my goal of sobriety. And the shift came when I realized what John was telling me, which was that relationship with Christ, that is the end, and sobriety is a natural byproduct of that relationship with Christ. So looking back over my story, I can really see God's grace just slathered all over it. He has been so gracious and faithful to me when I've never deserved it. The Lord spared me. He spared my life. But I feel what's even more gracious is I can feel his gracious hand spiritually never letting me go. Despite how hard I ran from him in rebellion to him, God always pursued me, always kept me in his hand, and then brought me back time and time again to him. And by God's grace, I have 2.5 years sober. I am in seminary pursuing a Master's of Divinity, and I'm very excited to join John on the Unbound Grace team as the Director of Outreach. And I'll also be working with men on the one-on-one basis in discipleship and mentorship. Unbound Grace is filling a very unique void, I think, in the recovery community, which is post-treatment care. For me, going to treatment, there was no safety net when I got out. And for a lot of guys, when we go home, there is no safety net, to walk us through reintegrating into life as we get home. It is focusing not just on helping our disciplees or our mentees to get and stay sober, but also to help them walk with Christ, to help them build and mend their relationships, and to be reintegrated into society with success. Throughout this whole journey, I've really come to see God's unbound grace in ways that I cannot describe. And I have also come to realize how true it is that Christ is the greatest goal that we can ever shoot to attain. Relationship with him is my end, and sobriety is truly a natural byproduct of walking closely with him. And I'm thankful for Unbound Grace for that. I've always known what it's like to be Christ's and held in his hand, but now I truly know from walking closely with him what it's like for him to be mine.